rules of acquisition of property are sensitive to the nature of the assets that are being acquired. So with land, the simple rule is you occupy it and mark off the boundaries. With respect to chattels like clamshells and so forth, you just pick them up and put them into your hands. The difficulties with wild animals that could start to run away, and the general principle is that he who captures the animal is its owner's. These rules of captures with respect to animals are also subject to further refinement because all animals are not alike. A fox can typically be captured by one person. A whale is a much more complicated animal, and often extensive levels of cooperation are needed in order for the capture to take place. So with the whales, what happens is captain will develop a system in which each of the particular seamen will get his fair share of the take. But oftentimes when you're dealing with whales, one boat will essentially wound the whale and somebody else may capture it, and then you have to develop systems which could allocate the gains between the two parties. Well, suppose you have a large number of people who own private parts of land which they use for planting crops during the summer. But they also own animals which graze in the mountains at that time. When they come back down, it turns out that the small plots of land are very bad for the animals in question. Whereas if you insist that each particular person can only graze during the winter his crops on his own particular plot of land, all will perish. And what you do is you create a closed commons by taking down the separate walls, allowing the animals to roam within it. And the way in which you control the tragedy is each person is allowed to inject into that particular commons only that number of animals which is proportionate to the land value that he contributes. So if you can control entry, you can create a system of common ownership which is going to be efficient. Very primitive cultures from a very early stage have figured out how to develop this situation where when you're growing crops, you treat the land as private property, and when you're husbanding animals during the winter season, you treat it as common property. And open commons cannot be stable because under those circumstances, anybody could send their animals onto the particular land, at which point the amount of forage will be quickly consumed, leading again to the overconsumption that turns out to be fatal. But so far we've ignored the so-called common pool problem. It turns out that when you're dealing with this common pool, there's the following tragedy. Anybody who captures a particular animal gets all the gain from its particular use, but suffers only a tiny fraction of the total loss that takes place from the diminution of the animals who are still unowned. And so what happens is, with both fish and gains, the tragedy of the commons arises because individual actors are myopic. They look only to their gains and they ignore the social losses. And the appropriate function of the state is to stop the tragedy of commons by limiting the total amount of the catch, and then further by assigning the amount that can be captured to individual actors so that they can remain in business. And this requires a large institutional framework that the common law cannot develop.